The great hull of Elysium Prime was not merely a structure, it was a statement. Its crystal pillars, soaring towards a ceiling that mimicked the star-dusted void, were a testament to an empire that had mastered the universe. The air hummed with the whispered conversations of 400 species, a symphony of power clad in silks and polished metals. They were the Galactic Concord, the architects of known space, and their collective presence was a weight that pressed down on the single, solitary figure walking towards the central podium. Ambassador Elena Vasquez's boots clicked against the iridescent marble, each step a sharp, lonely report in the cavernous space. She was the 39th human to make this walk. 38 times before, a representative of Earth had stood where she stood, hands filled with hope and data slates filled with proof. 38 times, they had been turned away. She was 39. For 28 years, since she was a bright-eyed junior diplomat full of starry-eyed ideals, this had been her life's work. Her pilgrimage. She had learned their protocols, studied their histories, and mastered the delicate art of navigating their labyrinthine bureaucracy. She had smiled through condescending remarks and held her tongue through veiled insults, all for this moment, year after year. Honored delegates of the Galactic Concord, she began, her voice a calm, steady river flowing over a bed of nervous stones. It did not shake. Her hands, holding the crystalline data slate, were steady. On behalf of the United Terran Federation, and all the people of Earth, I present our formal petition for membership. The slate glowed with soft, blue light. It contained everything. The entirety of human history, art, philosophy, and science. Population records, economic analyses, cultural anthologies. It was a testament to a species that had clawed its way from the mud of a violent world to the edge of the stars, a plea to be seen as more than the sum of their brutal origins. From his throne of living light, the Velith Primarch stirred. He was ancient, a being of crystallized energy whose form fractured light into dancing rainbows. He was the heart of the Concord, a ruler for 10 millennia, and he regarded Elena not with malice, but with the profound, unblinking indifference of a god observing an insect. Bring it forward, his voice resonated, not through the air, but within the mind of every being present. Elena climbed the dais, the steps cool beneath her feet. She offered the slate with both hands, a gesture of respect she had practiced until it was muscle memory. The Primarch took it. His crystalline fingers, which had shaped empires, held the sum of human aspiration. He did not glance at it. He did not access its data. He simply held it over the small, eternal flame that burned beside his throne, the flame of purity, they called it. The crystal did not melt. It shattered under the heat, its light dying with a sickening fizzle. The data, the hopes, the dreams of billions, dissolved into motes of black ash that drifted down to settle at Elena's feet. The hall erupted not in raucous laughter, but in a soft, tittering chorus of amusement. It was the sound of a master amused by a pet's futile trick. The answer remains unchanged, creature, the Primarch's voice boomed, devoid of any emotion. You are a product of a death world. Your biology is steeped in adrenaline and aggression. Your history is a litany of conflict. Your violence evolved primitives, and you will never sit among the civilized. Be grateful our quarantine allows you to exist at all." Elena stood frozen. She had expected this. She had prepared for this. She had built walls around her heart for this exact moment. But as the ash settled on the polished toes of her boots, she didn't feel the familiar sting of humiliation. Instead, she felt something deep within her, something that had been holding her together for 28 years, finally snap. It was not her spirit. It was her restraint. She did not look at the Primarch. She looked at the faces of the delegates, their features twisted in derision or blank with apathy. She met their gazes, one by one, and saw not superior beings, but something small and fragile. She saw fear masquerading as arrogance. Without a word, she turned. Her back, straight and proud, was her final statement. The whispers and titters followed her out of the great hall, but they could not penetrate the new, cold silence that had enveloped her soul. 3 weeks later, Elena stood in the United Terran Federation's primary situation room, buried a kilometer beneath the Swiss Alps. The air was thick with recycled oxygen and a tension far heavier than anything she'd felt on Elysium Prime. Here, the faces were not alien and disdainful. They were human, etched with the grim lines of a burden too great to bear. President Omara Okono, a woman whose face was a roadmap of a lifetime dedicated to peace, sat at the head of the table. Her hands were clasped so tightly her knuckles were white. They laughed. "Omara," Elena said, her voice low but clear, carrying to every corner of the silent room. "They have laughed for 30 years. And while we presented our petitions and they laughed, they have been killing us." Slowly, quietly, Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen, a man whose 60 years were carved into the scars on his hands and the silver in his close-cropped hair, stepped forward. He moved with the weary grace of an old wolf. He activated the central holographic display. A star map of human space bloomed into life. 17 colony worlds glowed a soft, healthy green. Then, Chen manipulated the controls. On each world, a subtle, insidious red stain began to spread from the landing zones of old, recorded concord, diplomatic visits. 6 months ago, our deep-range spectral analysts found it. Chen's voice was gravelly, stripped of all ornamentation. A synthetic biological agent. It bonds with the nitrogen-fixing bacteria in the soil. It doesn't kill the crops. It just sterilizes the land. Slowly, over 2 decades, the yield drops, season after season. By the time the famine is undeniable, it will be too late. A collective, horrified breath was drawn into the room. "They are starving us to death," Chen continued, the simple statement more terrifying than any shout. "They want us dependent on their food imports. They want us weak, desperate, and begging. And when we are on our knees, they will offer us a choice. Not membership, servitude, complete and total subjugation." President Okono closed her eyes. Elena could see the woman's dreams of peace, the ideals she had championed her entire career, crumbling behind her eyelids. "How many colonies?" she whispered. "All of them," Elena answered before Chen could. every world they ever graced with a visit. We have 10 years, maybe 15. Then the quiet dying begins. Then the end of our future. Okono opened her eyes. They were bright with unshed tears, but her jaw was set. What are our options, Admiral? Chen deactivated the display, plunging the room into a dimmer light. We have one. For 20 years, in hidden shipyards in the Oort cloud and the dark between asteroids, we have been building. Not with their technology, with ours. Faster drives, superior kinetics, armor they would consider wasteful. We have 300 warships and crews who know the price of failure. They are ready. You are talking about war, Marcus, the president said, her voice trembling. I am talking about the right of a child to eat, Chen replied, his gaze unwavering. I am talking about the right of a species to exist on its own terms. This isn't a war of conquest. It is a surgery to cut out a cancer that is already inside us. The room erupted. Voices overlapped. Shouts of fury. Desperate pleas for more time, for another diplomatic solution, for anything but this. Some sat in stunned silence, their worldviews shattered. Elena did not shout. She simply raised her hand. Slowly, the cacophony subsided, all eyes turning to the woman who had been their voice to the galaxy. I have spent my life believing in the power of words, she said, her voice hollowed out by grief, but underpinned with a core of newly forged steel. I believed that if we were patient, if we were reasonable, if we proved our worth, they would see the light in us. I was a fool. They do not want to see our light. They want to own the darkness. They don't want equals. They want pets. And she paused, her gaze sweeping the room. I am done being a pet. President Okono looked at Elena, at the ashes of her hope, and then at Admiral Chen, at the grim certainty in his eyes. She saw the resolve in the faces of her generals, the terror in the faces of her scientists, and the grim acceptance in the representatives of Earth's nations. She took a deep, shuddering breath. Call the vote. One by one, the leaders of humanity spoke. Aye. There were no nays, only a terrible, unanimous silence of assent. Okono turned to Chen. Begin your preparations, Admiral. What do you need from us? Chen's smile was a thin, cold thing, devoid of joy. It was the expression of a man closing a ledger filled with old debts. Just one thing, Madam President. A message. I want to use the QBT. I want a message that will reach every corner of the galaxy, every hidden colony, every oppressed species living under their heel. I want them to hear our voice, not as a plea, but as a fact. The quantum burst transmitter. Humanity's one great, secret leap in technology. A machine that could break the light-speed barrier for information. Okono nodded, a single, sharp gesture. Then write it, Admiral. And make them understand exactly who they have provoked. As Chen turned and left the room, a different kind of silence fell. Not the silence of despair, but the silence of a storm gathering its strength. The age of patience was over. The age of fire was about to begin. Captain Yuki Tanaka floated in the contemplative silence of the TFS Defiance's bridge, watching the star-dusted blackness. Her ship was one of 200, a ghost armada hidden in the lightless shadow of a dead moon at the edge of Concord space. 3 months of waiting, of drills, of silence. The waiting was a physical ache. Her crew, a tapestry of Earth's every nation and culture, was a family forged in shared purpose. They were engineers from Mars, pilots from the Pacific Isles, gunners from the Siberian steppes. They had all lost something to the gentle, smiling tyranny of the Concorde. Yuki's fingers brushed against a worn photograph taped to her command console. Her younger brother, Kenji, grinned back at her, forever 22. A simple bacterial infection, easily treatable. But the Concorde medical station in orbit around Jupiter had refused him entry. Deathworld biocontaminant risk, the automated message had stated. He had died in a sterile waiting room, shivering and alone, while medbots hovered just out of reach. She had enlisted the next day. The defiance was her promise to him. Captain. Her first officer's voice was soft. Signal from the Prometheus. The Admiral is ready. Yuki's heart hammered against her ribs. She pressed the ship-wide comm. All hands. This is the captain. Battle stations. This is not a drill. I repeat, this is not a drill. The Defiance shuddered to life around her. Lights shifting to a combat crimson, a beast awakening from a long slumber. On the bridge of the TFS Prometheus, Admiral Marcus Chen stood perfectly still. The holographic display before him showed the Concorde border fortress known as the Eternal Gate, a sprawling, crystalline monstrosity that had stood for 8,000 years, a monument to unassailable power. "Open the channel," he said, his voice calm. "All frequencies. Maximum burst." His communications officer, a young woman named Lee, looked up, her face pale. "Sir, the moment we broadcast, they'll have our exact location. Their entire fleet will." "Good," Chen interrupted, his eyes fixed on the Eternal Gate. "I want them to know who is coming for them." Lee nodded, her fingers flying across her console. "Channel open, sir. You or live. To the galaxy." Chen stepped forward, the camera drones focusing on his weathered face. Behind him, through the viewport, his fleet began to move, a wall of steel and vengeance emerging from the shadows. "This is Fleet Admiral Marcus Chen of the United Terran Federation," he began, his voice flat, devoid of the theatricality the Concorde so loved. It was the voice of a man reading a verdict. "This message is for the Velith Primarch, for the Galactic Concorde, and for every sentient being living in the shadow of their arrogance." He paused, letting the silence stretch across light years. "For 30 years, you called us animals. You burned our petitions. You laughed at our ambassadors. You looked upon our children and saw only contamination. You believed that because we evolved on a world that tried to kill us every single day, we must be lesser. You believed our struggle for survival was a mark of shame, not a badge of honor." On the Defiance, Yuki listened, her hand resting on Kenji's photo. On a dozen forgotten worlds, in hidden resistance cells and oppressed colonies, Beings of 100 species listened, their translators working furiously. You were right about one thing, Chen continued, his voice gaining a sharp, cutting edge. We are children of a death world. It taught us that when a predator has you cornered, you do not beg. You fight. It taught us that mercy is a choice granted to the deserving, not a right for the powerful. It taught us that there is a strength in community, in sacrifice, that your sterile, perfect civilization cannot even comprehend. He leaned forward, his image burning itself into the minds of 1,000,000,000,000 viewers. This is not a declaration of war. The war began the day you decided our children were not worthy of their future. This is a notification. We are the first death world species to survive long enough to make you answer for that choice. His voice rose, not in a shout, but in a cold, terrifying crescendo. To every species the Concord has crushed, to every world they have stolen, to everyone who has ever been told they are not good enough, not civilized enough, not pure enough, watch closely. The age of their arrogance ends today. The transmission cut out. On the bridge of the Prometheus, Chen turned to his tactical officer. All ships, attack. The human fleet surged forward. It was not an elegant, coordinated advance. It was a tidal wave of rage and grief. The commander of the Eternal Gate saw them coming. His sensors registered their primitive weapon signatures. He laughed, ordering his shields raised and his guns powered. He would teach these upstarts a final, brutal lesson. The first volley of human missiles struck the fabled shields. They did not dissipate. They did not bounce. They punched through, their kinetic impactors overloading the energy matrices in a way Concord science had deemed impossible. The fortress shuddered. The commander's laughter died in his throat. The Defiance led the assault, Yuki Tanaka driving her ship through a storm of plasma fire. Alarms blared. A hull breach screamed on Deck 4. She didn't flinch. Stay on course. All batteries. Target their primary power relay. They fought like the animals they were accused of being. They fought with a terrifying, beautiful desperation. They sacrificed ships to create openings, used their own wreckage as shields, and closed to point-blank range where their superior kinetics were unstoppable. The battle was a 4-hour symphony of destruction. When the last Concord gun battery fell silent, the Eternal Gate was a burning, broken husk, its crystal spires blackened and shattered. The human fleet had lost 12 ships. The Concord had lost its invincibility. As he watched the fortress burn, Admiral Chen did not feel triumph. He felt the weight of 12 crews, of thousands of lives, added to the scale. He thought of Kenji Tanaka, and all the other children who had died for the crime of being human. Send a message to Earth, he said, his voice thick with fatigue and sorrow. Tell them, the first blow has been struck. Across the galaxy, the broadcast was replayed, analyzed, and whispered in hushed, hopeful tones. On the prison planet of Keth, old Krex warriors, their scales dulled by centuries of forced pacifism, pulled hidden plasma blades from beneath the floors of their huts. On the strip-mined world of Mora, resistance fighters looked at each other with a new, fierce light in their eyes. The humans had not just won a battle. They had given the Forgotten a new word. Why not? 6 months later, Elena Vasquez, now bearing the title of War Coordinator, walked through a tunnel carved into the heart of a barren asteroid. The air was cold and smelled of ozone and alien musk. The tunnel opened into a vast cavern, and she stopped, her breath catching. Hundreds of Kreks stood in silent, perfect ranks. They were massive, reptilian bipeds, their scales like obsidian armor, their claws like shards of black glass. For 3,000 years, Concord edicts had forbidden them from warfare, forcing them into a docile, agrarian existence. They had been civilized into near extinction. Their leader, a mountain of scarred muscle and simmering fury named Grath, stepped forward. His voice was the grinding of continental plates. "You are the human, the one who speaks for the Deathworlders." "I am," Elena said, tilting her head back to meet his burning crimson eyes. "We saw your admiral's message. We watched your ships break their eternal gate." Grath's massive head tilted. "Why are you here? You are winning. You do not need us." "We are surviving," Elena corrected softly. "That is not the same as winning. The Concorde has 1,000 ships for every one of ours. If we fight alone, we will be ground to dust. Maybe not today, but eventually. Alone, we are a rebellion. Together, we are a reckoning." Grath made a low, rumbling sound. "The Concorde took everything from us. Our warships, our history, our pride. They told us our strength was a sickness, that our warrior spirit was a flaw to be purged. We believed them, and with each passing generation, we grew weaker. We forgot the songs of our ancestors." He took a step closer, his shadow engulfing her. "Then your admiral spoke. He did not ask for peace. He did not apologize for his strength. He reminded us of a truth we had buried." "What truth?" Elena asked, holding her ground. "That a peace demanded at Claw Point is not peace. It is a slow death. That there is no shame in the fight, only in the surrender." He extended a massive, clawed hand. Elena, her own hand looking like a child's, reached out and gripped his forearm in the Kreks warrior's clasp. "The Kreks will fight," Grath boomed, his voice echoing through the cavern. "Tell your admiral, he is not alone." They were not. The Mirani, their world a poisoned husk from Concord mining, offered their knowledge of secret passages and structural weaknesses. The Ixen, aquatic beings whose oceans had been drained for Concord colonies, gave them decades of clandestine intelligence on fleet movements and supply lines. They were the broken, the forgotten, the oppressed. And one by one, they stood up. The coalition of the forgotten was born not in a grand hall, but in the dark places of the galaxy, forged in shared pain and a spark of hope lit by a single, defiant broadcast. The war stretched into years. It was not a clean conflict of fleet engagements. It was a brutal, ugly thing fought in the ash of burned colonies and the blood-filled corridors of captured stations. Admiral Chen aged a decade for every year that passed. He walked through refugee camps on Mars, seeing the hollow eyes of children who had lost their worlds, their families, their future. The little girl who had asked if he would win now haunted his dreams. On Earth, President Okono battled the ghosts of her own conscience, facing protests from those who wanted peace at any price and those who wanted a genocidal revenge. If we become the monsters they accuse us of being, Elena counseled her during a late-night meeting, then they win. Even in defeat, their philosophy triumphs. The turning point came not on a battlefield, but in the heart of the Concord itself. High Executor Thelos, the commander of the Concord military, a pragmatic and honorable Velith, saw the truth. He saw his fleet being bled dry by an enemy that fought with a moral certainty he no longer possessed. After a devastating coalition victory at Nexus Point, a battle won only by the last-minute, sacrificial arrival of Graf's Krek's fleet, Thelos did the unthinkable. He broadcast a request for terms of surrender. The Velith Primarch's response was swift and brutal. He summoned Thelos to the Great Hall and, on a live feed to the entire Concord, executed him for treason. The image of the pragmatic, weary Thelos being disintegrated by the Primarch's own hand broke the back of the Concord. Fleets defected. Client species declared independence. The war was no longer humanity versus the Concord, it was the galaxy versus the Velith hardliners. The final assault on Elysium Prime was a gathering of ghosts. 500 ships from 24 species, human, Kreks, Mirani, Ixen, even defected Concord cruisers, hung in the void before the glittering heart of the Empire. It was beautiful, and it had to fall. Admiral Chen, on the bridge of his new flagship, received the Primarch's demand for surrender. He looked at the image of the Crystal Station, thinking of the ashes at Elena's feet, of Kenji Tanaka, of the little girl on Mars. "Tell him," Chen said to his comms officer, "that his petition has been denied." The battle was a storm of fire and sacrifice. Yuki Tanaka, now a Commodore, led the vanguard in the Defiance, a ship so rebuilt it was a testament to human stubbornness. They flew into a hail of fire to crack the station's shields, suffering catastrophic damage. When a Velith battleship had her in its sights, a Krek's ship, its hull painted with Graf's personal sigil, rammed the enemy vessel, destroying both in a silent, blossoming fireball. The shield fell. The coalition flooded in. The end came not in a grand duel, but in a quiet, tragic moment in the Primarch's throne room. As the ancient ruler reached for a doomsday device, a stellar igniter that would destroy the entire system, a young Velith officer, one of Thelos's protégés, stood in his way. "You would murder our entire civilization to save your pride?" the young officer asked, his voice trembling but firm. "Better oblivion than to be ruled by animals." The Primarch shrieked, his crystalline form flickering with insane rage. "You were wrong," the officer said, raising his sidearm. "They fight for each other. They die for a future for their children. We only ever fought for you." He fired. The war was over. 3 months later, the First Galactic Assembly of the New Order met in the Great Hall of Elysium Prime. The crystal pillars still stood, but they now reflected a vastly different crowd. Former slaves sat beside former masters. The air hummed not with arrogant whispers, but with the tentative, hopeful sound of a new beginning. Ambassador Elena Vazquez, once more in formal attire, walked to the central podium. She did not carry a data slate. She carried a simple, durasteel frame. Inside it, on one side, was a pristine copy of humanity's petition for membership. On the other, sealed behind a transparent panel, was a small pile of dark ash. 30 years ago, she said, her voice echoing in the utterly silent hall, I stood here and offered this document. It was burned. The words within, the dreams of my people, were turned to dust. She held up the frame. I do not present this today to ask for membership. I present it as a monument, a reminder of the cost of arrogance, a warning against the poison of absolute power. We place this here, in the heart of our new government, so that no one who walks this hall may ever forget what happens when you forget the value of a soul, no matter what world it comes from. The vote for humanity's membership was a formality. It was unanimous. Later, in the newly dedicated Memorial Plaza, an old human veteran sat on a bench, watching the mixed-species crowds. A young Velith girl, her crystal body gleaming in the starlight, approached him shyly. "Why?" she asked. "Why did you fight? Why did you start the war?" The old man, who had served on the Defiance, thought of Yuki Tanaka, of Kenji, of friends lost in the black. He thought of the Kreks who had died to save his ship. "We didn't start the war, little one," he said gently. "We just decided to stop losing it. We fought because someone had to prove that a difficult past doesn't dictate a hopeless future. And sometimes," he added with a faint, weary smile, "sometimes, the only way to earn a seat at the table is to build a new one, big enough for everyone." The girl considered this, then sat beside him. Together, human and Velith, they watched the ships come and go, a vibrant, messy, hopeful tapestry of a galaxy learning, for the first time, what it truly meant to be civilized. The silence that had once screamed with humiliation was now filled with the gentle, healing sound of a shared tomorrow.